All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webcast brought to you by the Chesapeake Stormwater Network. My name is David Wood. I'm the Stormwater Coordinator here. Today, we're going to be talking about community-led project planning. So just a couple of reminders as we get things started in case you're either new to our webcast series or it's been a little while. We do have a couple of poll questions at the start today, just to sort of get a sense of who you are, what your role is in your organization. So we make sure we're trying to address the questions that you might have and talk to you in the best way that we can. We do have question and answer periods built in today. So I encourage you anytime throughout any of the presentations this afternoon, please go ahead and put your questions into our either the Q&A feature or the chat box if you'd prefer. I'll be keeping an eye on those, and we'll have a pause in the middle and then some time at the end to answer any questions that you might have. As you might have heard when we got started, we are recording the session today. So we will be posting the recording as well as a copy of the slides to our website in the archives section, probably later today, maybe tomorrow at the latest, but we'll get that up soon. And then we do appreciate your feedback. As always, we have a very short evaluation at the end of today's webcast. I'll put the link in the chat when we're all done. I do encourage you to please take a moment and fill that out for us. It tells us whether we're doing a good job or not, how we can be better. It also gives our funders a sense of how it's going so that we can keep offering these things to you for free. So it's only 4 questions and it'll just take a minute. For those of you who are maybe new to the Chesapeake Stormwater Network, our webinar series, I'll just briefly say we're a 2-person nonprofit organization. You can join our network, in other words, get our monthly newsletter by going to that link that's on the page here. It's totally free for you to be involved. It gives you all the reminders to these webcasts that we do. Usually we do 12 to 20 in a year. We do have a number of other fact sheets, technical resources on stormwater management, best management practices, restoration practices. We do some fun stuff, including our Best Urban BMP and the Bay Awards, which I'm actually going to talk about a little bit more today, as well as trainings, workshops, and other events. So check it out if you are not already a member. So as far as today's agenda, we'll have our couple of quick polls at the beginning, and I'll just say a few words to sort of set the stage and ground us in the topic today. And then we're going to hear about 2 really good examples of community-led project planning to get us back to our theme, right? One of which is the Upper Watts Branch Forest Preserve project, and the other is the Mount Olivet Cemetery Green Infrastructure project. I think we're actually going to flip the order here that we have on the screen, but we'll be going through those as sort of good case studies for involving and engaging community members early on in the process. So what I'll go ahead and do now is I'm going to launch our 2 poll questions. They're going to come up at the same time, so you can scroll between the 2 of them to answer them both. The first is just to let us know who you're representing today. Are you with the local government, a state government, federal agency, in the private sector, nonprofit, academia, or something else? And if it's something else, please feel free to let us know in the chat box. And then our second question today is sort of, what is your usual role in project planning? So maybe you're a project designer or engineer. You're sort of usually kind of in the nuts and bolts work. Maybe you are someone that usually has a community outreach and engagement role. Maybe you're a project manager. You're sort of shepherding a project all the way through the process. You do a little bit of everything. The other option that we have today is working on the regulatory side, the equation, reviewing and approving projects. These might not all fit, in which case, sorry if we missed what your role might be. You can again tell us about it in the chat, or tell us a little bit more in the survey. So I'll go ahead and close that and share the results quickly with you all. So we have a pretty good distribution, a lot of folks from the private sector and engineering community today. That's good to see, as well as a handful of folks from elsewhere. And same thing on the project role side of the equation, a nice mix, a lot of folks that are kind of used to working in the designing and engineering space, and a few Jacks and Jills of all trades as well. So thanks for sharing that with us. We will go ahead and keep moving things along. Just to sort of put, again, a little bit of context around this theme for today, talking about community-led project planning. It's a topic that's coming up more and more often in the restoration community in the Chesapeake Bay. I think for a couple of reasons. One of which is, the goal of making sure that the projects that we are, designing and implementing in the landscape are meeting the needs of the communities that we're serving. There have been examples of projects that meet a lot of resistance because maybe they weren't introduced to the community early enough, or there were some design components that folks were not aware of or understood. And so we're trying to help lower those barriers and reduce headaches for folks that are working at a local community scale or for an engineering firm, and trying to help those things run a little bit more smoothly. I think the other is really sort of a diversity and equity issue as well, an inclusion issue. We have some guiding questions that really came up in a webinar that we offered earlier this spring on climate resilience, but sort of with an equity lens. And I think that they were important from a community engagement standpoint as well. So, Dr. Hoover posed these on one of her slides, and I just wanted to borrow them to help set the stage here. And it's, just making sure that when we are, doing our project planning, our watershed planning, that we're really thinking about the benefits to the residents where our projects, whether it's green infrastructure, stream restoration, or otherwise, are being implemented, as well as just being thoughtful that the benefits that we are hoping to achieve are the same ones that the residents have identified as a want or a need, right? And then that we have the policies and the investments that can sort of back those up. And so it's just really being thoughtful and grounding our projects in the communities that we're working in. The other couple of questions that I just wanted to sort of put in your heads before we get started today, are when are we engaging the community members in the project planning process? I think we see a lot of times that it comes sort of after the design has already been selected, and it's sort of a here's what's coming type of heads up, as opposed to maybe something where we're going out and talking to community members in advance and saying, here are some different options. What do you think would work best in your community? How do we know if it's meaningful and effective? What are we doing to measure those benefits? And then, how do we know, what the outcomes are, or have we thought about what the outcomes are that we're hoping to achieve in our outreach efforts? Is it a certain amount of sign off from community members? Is it an actual design that has specific input from a maybe community design charrette or something of that nature? So, are we thinking about what we want those outcomes to be before we get started? So that brings us to the two projects that we're going to be talking about or hearing about today. They really came into our laps through our Best Urban BMP in the Bay Awards, our BUBBAs contest. Both of these projects were winners in their respective categories, or second place, in their respective categories. And for those of you who maybe aren't familiar, the BUBBAs contest is something we've been doing for about 5 years now at CSN, and it's a way to really recognize and celebrate people that are taking innovative approaches to the field of stormwater management and trying to share those lessons and innovations with each other in a really collaborative way. And so, this webcast is part of that effort to share these lessons and really about the sort of practical elements of project design and implementation. So not just a particular technology or something like that might be innovative, but what are folks doing in the engagement and outreach spaces? How are they being creative in how they're complying with their permits or meeting their MS4 requirements and things like that. And so that's really what we're trying to achieve with the BUBBAs, and these two projects, the Mount Olivet Cemetery Green Infrastructure and the Upper Watts Branch Forest Preserve Restoration, really stood out for that community driven and engagement type of approach that they took, even though they were nominated and winners as retrofits and stream restorations respectively. So with that, I want to go ahead and introduce our speakers today, and I'll turn it over to them without further ado. So Tim Schuler is a professional engineer with Hazen and Sawyer, and actually the brother of CSN Executive Director Tom Schuler. Tim has 33 years of stream restoration, engineering, and design experience, specializing in urban and ultra-urban impaired streams with limited site access. So he has evaluated, designed, constructed, and monitored over 22 miles of stream projects across 15 states. We also have Aileen Craig from the Nature Conservancy. She is the Stormwater Retention Project Manager, where she leads the design, construction, and maintenance of green infrastructure projects. She manages the landowner relationships and conducts analysis to find potential stormwater management project sites throughout the district that provide environmental and social benefits. Prior to joining District Stormwater LLC, she spent 7 years as a water resource engineer, designing, permitting, constructing green infrastructure projects throughout the Chesapeake Bay watershed. All right, so welcome to both of you. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Aileen to talk about the Olivet Cemetery, Mount Olivet Cemetery project. So take it away.
Great, thanks, David. And let me just get my screen set up here. Okay, thank you. So today I'm going to talk to you guys about the Mount Olivet Cemetery Green Infrastructure Project, which was done under District Stormwater. And District Stormwater is an arm of the Nature Conservancy that does this green infrastructure work here in DC. And just to set the stage on the community partnership part of it, I wanted to share this short video, which highlights two of our major partners, Cheryl Tyeska, who's the cemetery manager, and John Spalding, who is the president of the Catholic Archdiocese of Washington. And they are the landowners of this cemetery and integral to making this project happen. So take a few minutes to hear from them.
There's a lot of history here. Since 1858, Mount Olivet has been welcoming to all people, regardless of their race or their faith. When the cemetery was first opened, it was open farmland, and they just started piecing the cemetery together, and nobody back in those days was thinking about the environment or stormwater management or trees or anything like that. They were just looking for places to bury people.
Historically, society's not been concerned about the environmental impact. They always felt the earth would adjust and take care of itself. But it was shocking for us to realize that we have over 435,000 square feet of impervious surface. There's millions of gallons of water that comes off of our property after raining that carries warmed up water into the Anacostia and the watershed, as well as pollutants that come out of the air, as well as oils off the road.
Stormwater is a big problem in Washington, D.C., Chesapeake Bay watershed, nationally and globally. All the stormwater runoff that happens in this cemetery goes directly into the tributaries into the Anacostia River. And so what happens here in the Anacostia River ultimately ends up in the Chesapeake Bay. And so cleaning the river here has a huge benefit locally, but also has a huge benefit across the whole Chesapeake Bay.
We want to be better stewards of the property, not just for ourselves, but for the future generations that we serve. So given the opportunity to work with the Nature Conservancy to ameliorate that, it was something we definitely want to do as a part of our ministry.
Once you know something, you have to do something about it, and that's what we're trying to do.
The projects we're doing here are going to have a direct benefit for the Anacostia River, helping to clean the river and to improve the quality of water in that river. What we're doing specifically is we're taking out some of the impervious surface, removing it completely, taking out some of the roads, some of the parking areas, and turning that into rain gardens, via retention, which essentially is putting back in engineered spaces with nature to capture and filter and clean the stormwater before it trickles out into the Anacostia River.
The other thing we're going to do, hopefully, is to become a demonstration site for other cemeteries or other large properties who will be able to come here and learn from what we're doing, because what we're doing is pretty unique. Then I think it's going to beautify the cemetery and make the cemetery a much more comforting place, a more beautiful place, to just find a little oasis of peace in the middle of a busy city.
My father taught me how to live on the land, how to respect the land, our waterways and our soil. It's nice to have the opportunity to continue that heritage. It's all a part of that continuum from generation to generation.
So that video, I hope, helped set the stage and introduce both Cheryl and John, who were integral partners in making this project happen. And before I dive more into the actual project and the relationship, I just wanted to set the stage a little bit for how this project came to be and how we got involved in this work in DC. So our motivation for actually starting this project was based off of DC's 2013 Stormwater rule. And when they put this in place, they put in a requirement for new development projects to retain the 90th percentile storm on site, and major renovation projects to retain the 80th percentile. But with that rule, they wanted to give some flexibility. So they put in place a stormwater retention credit market. And the idea of the market is people could build voluntary projects on their private land and then sell that storage and treatment to developers to then meet their regulation. So these are stormwater retention credits. It's 1 gallon of stormwater stored per rain event, the average rain event. And this gives both the city and developers more flexibility. It allows projects to be built throughout the city instead of just where developments happen. And it allows projects to be built in higher benefit watersheds. So when this market was put in place, we wanted to help prove this concept. So we wanted to be a player in the market. But the first step to do that was to find a project site where we could make this happen. So that's what led us to Mount Olivet Cemetery. We've actually been in partnership with them since 2015. We first became connected with them through our partnership with Anacostia Watershed Society, who had already been talking to Cheryl about potential green infrastructure projects on their site. And this site had a lot of potential. It's over 80 acres with about 60% of it in the MS4. So in the watershed, that'll go straight into the waterways. It has over 435,000 square feet of impervious cover. And even what isn't impervious at a cemetery is compacted cover. So that still, only has a marginally better environmental benefit to the waterways. And it's located in the Hickey Run watershed of DC. And Hickey Run is, a very urban stream. It suffers from erosion and sedimentation. So doing a project in this watershed will both benefit directly Hickey Run and then downstream to the Anacostia. And so with working with the Anacostia Watershed Society and Cheryl, we were able to be connected to Mount Olivet to use this as a pilot project for the stormwater retention credit market. And so, like I said, we actually became connected with them in 2015. And we have been doing this project in phases since it's such a long site. So phase 1 was completed in 2018, phase 2 in 2019, and we're working on the design of phase 3 now. And between phase 1 and phase 2, we're already treating about 5 million gallons of stormwater annually with our project. And part of the reason I highlight the timeline is, if you can see, we were first connected in 2015, and then the project was completed the first phase in 2018. So what happened in that 3-year period? The whole first year and a half of this project was relationship building. It was talking with the landowner, learning their needs, having meetings. And that aspect of it isn't always seen in these projects, the amount of upfront time that goes into the building the relationship before anything on the ground happens. So here's actually a picture from Mount Olivet from early on before we started. And as you can see, they were already having flooding issues on their campus. The site, as I said, is mostly impervious and compacted cover, and it's very hilly. So during large storm events, the water would flood. So we knew one of their issues that we could help address was already flooding. So a lot of this first year was us talking with them to both find out what their wants and needs are, and also us helping to explain to them the benefits of these projects. So the benefits to the landowner are, stormwater management on their site. And they also have the additional benefit of DC Water has the impervious area fee within DC. So by doing these stormwater projects, we're able to reduce their fees. And we do eventually do as we build these projects, we then sell these credits on the market, which we're able to then cost share back to the landowner. So there are a lot of benefits, but we have to kind of meet with the landowner, meet with the board to share these upfront. And then it's not only talking about the benefits, it's figuring out what the project is, how it's shaped. So this is a map of Mount Olivet Cemetery aerial view from around where we did the projects. And a lot of the first year was spent walking the site with Cheryl, walking the site with the team that maintains the grounds, and learning how the site's utilized. This is private property, but the site's open to the public most days of the week. People come to visit their family members, hold funerals here, and it's also used by the community as a park. People are able to walk, run, and just, have this access to green space in DC. It's in Northeast DC. It is across from the Arboretum, so there is green space there. But outside of those two areas, this is a very urban part of the city with lots of roads, lots of buildings, not much green space once you get outside of these parks. So we wanted to learn from Cheryl how the community and how their team uses this land, so we could have a project that fits within their needs. And just some of the things we learned from these discussions: most of these roadways you can see were originally two-way, but they told us the roads actually, you can loop around. So they were able, a lot of those roads could become one-way without hurting the flow of the cemetery. There are sidewalks here that cut across throughout, and from talking to the groundskeeper and Cheryl, we learned that most people just park their cars and walk directly to the graves. They don't even use the sidewalks. So we could add elements of removing that sidewalk impervious area and adding trees to add more green space and shade for people while they're out there. And then we learned that circle area off to the right actually is a really high traffic area that leads to the chapel, which is where most of the ceremonies happen. And that area would be an inconvenience to people if the roads were smaller or the sidewalks were gone. So we knew not to have any elements in that part of the project. So it was all through this year of conversation leading up that we learned how to best suit this project to the community and their needs. And part of this is done before we do anything. And then it's during our master planning stage, which is where we put in the footprints and have a lot of these conversations. And this is all done before we do any design. And then once we have the master plan, we then take that to meetings with the management of the cemetery. We presented it to the Catholic Archdiocese of Washington, to the board, and at ANC community meetings, to make sure we heard from the voices of people who use the cemetery before we really got into detailed design. So as I said, this process took almost a year and a half. And then at that point, we started doing the design. But then at each phase, 30%, 70, 100, we would then have meetings with at least Cheryl to make sure we were progressing in a way that suited the cemetery and the community. So a few other design elements that were decided based on these conversations. This is a picture of one of the bioretentions that went in along the road. So this is one of the two-way roads that through conversation we found out could be a one-way road. And as you can see, they're right up against the graves. So with working with Cheryl, one of the elements we added was doing ground penetrating radar before any of the projects. And that was to help make sure we actually knew where the grave line was. The cemetery is almost 100 years old. So some of the documents, it may not line up correctly. It's hard to always know exactly where the lines are. So we wanted to ensure we didn't disrupt any of the graves during our construction process. And we also decided to add liner in all of our facilities. Normally in bioretention, liner is decided based on the infiltration rate. However, when working in a cemetery, when somebody is embalmed, though there are chemicals used sometimes, and there was a worry those chemicals could have potentially leached out into the groundwater. So by adding this infiltration facility, we didn't want it to then leach into that and into the waterway. So we decided to add liner throughout the cemetery in all of the bioretention to protect from that. So this picture shows one of the end product bioretention. So in some of our conversations, one of the designs we ended up coming up with. So on the left is showing the before, the two-way roads. And then on the right, you see the bioretention facility put in, which takes up half the road and treats the other half of the roadway, along with the compacted cover coming into the facility. And this was one of our other designs based on conversations. There were some roadways throughout the cemetery that weren't even used, had very little traffic. So Cheryl and her team were able to highlight those roads to us, and we were able to remove that impervious area completely and replace those with bioretention facilities. So another one of the elements that I mentioned earlier on was the removal of sidewalks and planting of trees. And with this, I also wanted to highlight one of our other partners. As I've mentioned, this project, we had a lot of partners that made it possible. We worked closely with Casey Trees on all of the tree plantings. So both in the areas where we removed sidewalks and throughout the campus, they also talked closely with Cheryl to make sure everything fits where the plantings are and meet their needs. And as we're working on phase 3 now, we're talking with Casey Trees and asking them to put together a master plan, working with Cheryl to basically plant trees wherever possible. We want to utilize as much of the space as possible to get both the environmental benefit from the trees. And also, as I said, this place is used by a lot of people. So the social benefits of having the trees to provide shade and cleaner air to the community as they move throughout the cemetery. So expanding on the tree planting, and another aspect that ended up being part of this project, this is looks like an empty hillside originally on the campus, but talking with Cheryl, we found out it's actually the burial site of people who were enslaved, and they ended up having unmarked graves here. So when we found that out, we wanted to incorporate that in the project to both recognize and honor this space and have some sort of marking. And this leads us to another one of our partnerships with Nature Sacred, who does community designed green spaces throughout the region. So we partnered with them to try to put together a space that would honor this area and also give the community a space to reflect. So the first aspect of that was, once again, lots of community meetings. Nature Sacred we worked with them to put together a design and concept, and then had meetings throughout the community where we could talk through, find out what the needs were, and how to best design the space that it would work for everyone. So this is a photo showing one aspect of what we came up with. So this is on that hillside. We ended up adding one of Nature Sacred benches there. As you can see, underneath the bench, there's a little pouch, which is where a journal is held. And so when anyone is there sitting, they can actually take it and reflect and write messages. So it's really nice if you ever get a chance to go there to sit and read other people's reflections and kind of take a minute. And we have these trees around the bench, which kind of make it in a closed area to have that time to sit and reflect. And so this shows the area, again, kind of off to the side. You can see that line of trees are the outside of the trees enclosing that bench. And then we ended up adding this plaque as another way to commemorate that area. And on it says, dedicated to the memory of those unknown who were enslaved and buried at the cemetery and throughout the Archdiocese of Washington. And through adding this space, we also held community tree planting events also on this hillside as a way to mark this space. And through these community events, a woman found out that one of her family members was buried there. So on the left, you can see a tent and a group of people that decided to come out and have a family event to commemorate their family members there. And one of the things they did is, after helping plant the trees, they tied ribbons on the trees for the event. This is a quote from the woman who organized it, whose family member was buried there. If you carry a name and you don't know anybody in your family, what does that mean? To be able to connect with the story and other people that are descendants is a powerful thing. So now I'm going to switch gears slightly and go from the community engagement that led up to the project and through the design and construction to the community engagement that comes after the project. Once a project is built, there always ends up being those little things that you don't quite think about, that don't quite go as planned. I think everyone's probably seen those in their projects. So one aspect on the left here, this is an aerial view of one of the roadways where we took out half the road and put in bioretention. And though there's space for the cars to drive straight, we ended up having issues where the turn radius wasn't quite enough. So here you can see, if you turn to the right, you can kind of see the dirt from cars going over. And then you can see that here on the left too, the sharp turn and then the dirt. So by working closely with Cheryl and her team, and the fact that we are still working on another phase, one of our goals of this phase 3 is not just to add, we are adding more bioretention and trees and removing more impervious area, but we also want to make sure we address any issues that came up in the earlier phases. So we are going to actually add a little bit of impervious area back in here to protect where the cars are turning. We want to make sure we leave the site better than we found it. So just give that space for the maintenance vehicles and trucks to safely turn throughout the campus. And then another issue that came that we ended up running into that changed our design from phase 1 to phase 2 is by making the half roads, and also the curbs were pretty low in the bioretentions. Cars didn't always know they were there. So we actually had a car drive into the bioretention after phase 1. It's not something you want, both from the safety of the car and the person and the facility. So we ended up adding these yellow billards, as you can see here, throughout the bioretentions. And then we put in these large planters leading up as a higher visual element for cars to see. And then phase 1, as you can see here, had these sharp radiuses, turns. And then phase 2, we made it more rounded to make it easier for cars to turn around. And all of these elements, we came from direct conversations with Cheryl and her team and finding out issues, because they're there every day. We aren't. They're the ones that best know what issues they're having and what design changes are needed. And this is one final element we ended up adding. This is a mock-up of signs we put throughout. So as I said, it's private land, but a public space. People come to bury family members, to walk, to run. So the surrounding community will see these bioretentions as they're moving through the cemetery. So we wanted to show people what was happening and why we were there. So we added these signs throughout the cemetery, and they explain what is stormwater, what are the benefits, and we call out the different elements, show what it looked like before, what it looks like now, and how this is helping their community. So I just wanted to take a second, as I keep mentioning, this was done through the help of many partners. Mount Olivet Cemetery, which is run by the Catholic Archdiocese of Washington and own the land. Nature Sacred, our nonprofit partner who helped with the community garden. Casey Trees, who helped with a lot of the tree planting. EQR did construction of phase 1. Triangle did construction of phase 2. And Tetra Tech has been doing design for us throughout. And also thank you to the Chesapeake Stormwater Network for honoring us with the 2nd place award for the Stormwater Retrofit Project. And just to close, kind of what I've been saying throughout is people see the final product, they see the construction going in. But what a lot of times people don't know is that year and a half ahead of time before we even got to design that was spent meeting with the landowner, meeting with the community, and taking that time to really understand what the needs for a successful project. So thank you, and I will pass it back to David now.
Great, thanks very much. I think it's a wonderful project. That obviously, you know, it stood out in our BUBBAs competition. I'll just take a second to see if there are any quick questions from folks that we want to address now. I have one maybe to give folks just a second before we head over to Tim's presentation. You know, a question that we get a lot, you know, is sort of how to structure the community meetings, the community engagement types of meetings, to really ensure that you can sort of maximize the participation and involvement, and particularly kind of make sure you're getting you know, a diversity of perspectives and people that can be there at those meetings. I was just wondering if you could maybe speak for just a second about some of those community meetings and how you guys went about setting those up to try to improve involvement.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the important elements was actually really relying on Cheryl. At the end of the day, we're not the ones in the community. We don't know the community as well, and she's there every day and knows the community. So we worked with her a lot to figure out how to best communicate these meetings out, who should be involved, make sure voices were there. So I think that was one of the big elements. And then at the meetings, we did the technique where we had a few design elements and ideas up already just to kind of help frame what we wanted to do, because sometimes a completely open board can, you know, get you all over the place, but it was pretty high level. And then we used assessments like, you know, writing on post-it notes, and just giving people time, because I know if you, not everyone likes to speak publicly, not everyone wants to share in those situations. And then we presented it to different types of groups. So we had open meetings, we connected through ANC and through other partners in the area to make sure we were able to connect with different groups.
Great. One question came in about the credits. Can the credits be sold outside of the watershed that the practice was constructed within?
Yeah, so they can be sold outside of the watershed. The market is limited to DC, and there are certain requirements. So our credits are constructed in what's considered a high impact watershed in the MS4, so they can be sold anywhere. However, if you construct in the combined sewer system, you can only sell within the combined sewer system. So there are rules based on where the project's constructed, but when you do a high impact project, you can sell them throughout DC.
Great. Well, thanks so much. We'll have another opportunity for a few more questions if folks think of them. But for now, I will go ahead and turn it over to Tim to talk about the Upper Watts Branch Forest Preserve project.
Right. Thank you, David. David, if you can confirm that you can see my screen.
I cannot yet.
I'll try again. That's probably better.
There we go. Yep.
All right. Well, thanks, David, for the earlier introduction. Thanks to my co-presenter, Aileen, for such a good presentation. It was awesome. I'm going to talk about the Upper Watts Branch project, some design elements, and some community engagement elements. So the Upper Watts Branch Ecological Restoration, it's located in Rockville, Maryland, and the project was funded by the City of Rockville and the Chesapeake and Atlantic Coastal Bays Trust Fund. It was designed by Charles B. Johnson and Hazen and Sawyer, and it was built by EQR. This winter aerial photograph gives you some appreciation for the size of the forest preserve, about 80 acres. You can also see the outline of sewer systems that were installed in the 60s, the red and the green lines. Here's another map of the site. You'll see in the upper right-hand corner of the map orientation, that's the north is to the left, stream flow is south or to the right. You can see the perennial stream flow, which is shown in blue, and there are, the red represents 4 gullies draining the adjacent neighborhoods of Woodley Gardens, College Gardens, and Plymouth Woods. Another map. The purple represents the limits of the geofluvial survey work we completed. CPJ had previously surveyed this subject tributary here, so you can see our knowledge of the site was pretty extensive. Just want to give you a sense of place. These pictures give you a sense of the forest preserve and the size of some of the trees. The last logging was circa the 1920s. So some of the trees are about 100 years old. As far as the timeline, the city completed a topographic survey of the park, including specimen trees, in 1999. The city also had a study completed for the entirety of Watts Branch watershed within the city limits in the year 2000. And that study had recommended stream restoration be implemented within the preserve, something which the adjacent citizens were opposed to. So some time passed, other projects noted in the watershed study were constructed, and then the time came for this project. As I mentioned, we did a geofluvial survey in 2011, and we started to do work for design in 2012. But we had to hold our horses because there was some pushback from the citizens, which I'll get into. We did our final evaluations, and we did a number of evaluations from 2012 to 2013, and did our final evaluations and design 2014 to 2016. The work was constructed over the winter of 2017 and 2018, and currently it's being monitored for compliance with permits. So there are 2 main tributaries. Tributary 1, the Western Fork, pictured here, and Tributary 2, the Eastern Fork. Though still urban streams, each tributary has benefited from some level of historic stormwater management in their headwaters, particularly Trib 1. The majority of Trib 1's length was stable with good floodplain access, as this photo shows. And so this good condition was noted by some as a reason not to do stream restoration if some stormwater management control was working. This is a different area of the project with a different problem. This is the 2011 condition of the main tributary where it flows under Nelson Street. In the early 2000s, beaver came in and backwatered the area that you see there, and they killed all the mature trees. The beavers sort of left under mysterious circumstances, and what they left were a bunch of dams which deteriorated. Invasive species moved in, as you can see from this photo, basically completely took over, and I do mean completely. I remember being out on site, and there was a tree stump or a tree that had fallen over and leaving a hole in the ground, and there were wetland plants at the bottom of that hole. Another log had fallen over it so that the deer couldn't get in and eat it. So there just wasn't an opportunity for the natural plants to regenerate because of the deer. So this is Tributary 2, the Eastern Fork. It had fewer stormwater management controls in its headwaters than Tributary 1 did. Consequently, it was more unstable, and a large portion of the stream looked like this photo. Still, there was an argument for installing more upstream stormwater facilities in the headwater, since those facilities had done a better job in Tributary 1, where there were more of them and they were in place for a longer period of time. So this is a excerpt from a pre-designed citizen communication to the city about this project and past experience with the city, and it gives you some idea of what we were taking on, and I'll just sort of summarize here. Basically, a long history of bad experiences, DPW, our client, ignored environmental costs, hired a consultant that cooked up the numbers, withheld information. 300 citizens came to the mayor and council hearing on the project to protest. So as you can see, some definite concern. You may have not been to the mayor and council meeting room in downtown Rockville, but it can't hold 300 people. So I'm sure that meeting was pretty intense. But the upshot of this pushback from the citizens were, quite frankly, they felt they were railroaded in the past on some similar projects, and they didn't want to be railroaded on this particular project. Luckily, James Fetchu and Huang Tao from CPJ and myself, we had done some previous work for the city, and the city project managers had some trust in our abilities. And then it was up to us to try to gain the trust of the citizens. So if you're going to cut down a tree in a forest preserve, like this large maple or large mature beech here, you better have a good reason to do it and better show your work. At the beginning of the project, we knew proposing impacts without the public's buy-in was a non-starter. The city was very keen on the project for the right reasons, and they knew this, and they offered up a whole different approach, which was a joint citizen city task force. And so the task force membership was created, and long and the short of it, the task force was going to be co-chaired by a community member. There were going to be 3 permanent members, one from each of the local neighborhoods, and then any community member or a member from the public at large could attend any of the meetings. So this was an initial start to try to get the project back on track. And what that involved was creating a 10-step approach, which was called the roadmap. And so each task, from geofluvial survey to the final archaeology study, was identified and its status tracked. So the basic concept was to present one step of the study at the task force meeting to the citizens, and then give them a chance to mull that over during and after the meeting. And then at the next meeting, they could comment on what they thought of the previous presentation material, and then they would decide if they would accept it. We would present something new, and the city wasn't allowed to move forward until there was agreement, from the citizen members that each task item had been completed. And so they were checked off, and it's not shown here, but at the end of the job, all of the check marks, all the boxes have been checked. To maximize citizen involvement, the city held a number of public field walks. They advertised them through postcard mailers sent to the neighborhood residences. I think there were over 500 of them. They included door hangers for the citizens directly adjacent to the park, as well as advertisement from the city's website and word of mouth. The field walks were often held in duplicate, with one of the days on a Saturday, so that participation could be maximized for folks that couldn't make the meeting during the week. And so the city went through a lot of effort to keep the citizens engaged, and that was appreciated by the citizen members of the task force. So the site's headwaters, designated here as drainage areas W1 and W3, had existing stormwater management, as I mentioned. And so one of the preliminary orders of business was to determine if some combination of retrofits and new facilities might accomplish enough stormwater management control in the form of channel protection volume to avoid stream restoration in the first place. If you can not impact the park and not have stream restoration, and accomplish this through another means, that would make sense to at least explore that. And so the citizens wanted that thoroughly explored before moving on. So we, as the consultants, we went and we visited all of the existing facilities, and we reviewed the existing models and created new ones. And so it turned out that even with the most optimistic stormwater management retrofit scenario, they would only provide about a third of the channel protection volume that would be necessary to protect the streams in the forest preserve. So, and that was, very optimistic in terms of, land availability and costs. So then the question became, well, what's the minimal amount of stream work that can be accomplished to sort of make up that difference in stormwater, and how much of that, what is the least footprint that would save the most trees? Well, there's nothing like data, and the consultants, we sift through quite a bit of it. And we made some pretty good use of what we were given. Using sewer design information from 1960 and 1969, plus a full park survey completed in 1999 that we referred to earlier, we were able to confirm where and by how much the stream patterns had changed over 40 years. And pattern migration for stream is natural. There's nothing wrong with it. But urbanization and now climate change sort of exacerbates the stream's movements. And so we were able to determine where this would already be conflicting with the sewer systems or might conflict with them in the future. Here's an exhibit combining some crucial data, including additional full tree survey completed in 2013. So you can see that there are areas we noted as being fairly highly eroded in red, and you can see the existing stream in blue. We identified 4 areas where we thought there was a migration risk, the meander pattern of the stream. We identified 1 area where a manhole was being exposed by that migration. We noted a bunch of trees that were being undercut by the stream in 2013, and then all of the trees that had died between 1999 and 2013. And so, putting something like this together, it condensed a lot of information in a way that was pretty easily understandable. And we wanted to basically have the task force consider the fact that, if you have some mature trees, many of which are threatened and some have died, it may make sense to do some stream work because those trees are going to be lost anyway. So we wanted to see what balance of that type of work would be appropriate. So here's the result of our erosion study showing the areas recommended for work. So there were 4 stormwater gullies that were draining from the 3 neighborhoods, and there was no mystery that we were going to do something with them since they weren't perennial. I'll go into that in more detail. There was an area suggested on tributary 1. Remember, I said tributary 1 was pretty stable, and we recommended no work be done except for this 1 exposed manhole, and I'll show you what occurred there. There was a small portion of work done on what we call the main stem, where the 2 tributaries came together. And just a brief aside on that, one of the citizen community involvement items and a permit item was an archaeology study. So this area had some Native American artifacts, and particularly where this main stem area was. So we had something done called a phase 1 archaeology evaluation. And so I learned what that was, which was sort of go out and do a preliminary analysis to see, if there are artifacts and of a sufficient amount and quality that something called a phase 2 evaluation would be done. And that's sort of what we picture, with people putting, strings in a matrix, and people sort of, picking up things and brushing them off. And that archaeology study is pretty involved. It took a long time and it was kind of tough. We just finished that up before construction. It was one of the most time-intensive elements. We also did say that tributary 2, which had less stormwater management and therefore more erosion, there was a pretty long stretch there that needed some work. It's about 700 feet. So all in total, we recommended about 2,000 feet of work out of a total of 10,000. But of that 2,000 feet, 1,000 of it was those ephemeral drainage ditches. So we were only impacting about 1,000 feet of actual perennial stream. So by this point, with the citizens task force, things were going, much more smoothly. And not only were the public members of the task force, kind of satisfied with our study results, they actually recommended some changes to streamline the original roadmap, and make it more efficient. One of the early areas agreed on were these 4 gullies I mentioned. And it's obvious to anyone that they were eroding and the storm drain infrastructure was failing and something needed to be done. So what we did was use a project, a stormwater management methodology called Regenerative Stormwater Conveyance, or RSC, and that was installed at 2 of the 4 outfalls, and as a combination of sand and wood chips and step pools. This is a photo of outfall 1, and you can see this is before we did any work. This is during the construction of that generative conveyance. And so you can see that there's a bunch of sand that's been installed at the bottom, and that's actually a mixture of sand and wood chips. The wood chips came from trees that were chipped from on site. I'll go into that in more detail. And then some stone was placed on top of that. This is a picture of this regenerative conveyance right after construction during a small storm event. Ecological restoration for the area flooded by the beavers was also pretty straightforward. The stream banks were eroding the channel. It was actively cutting back and forth through the layers of a legacy fill. The trees were already dead, so stream restoration didn't seem that practical or necessary. One of the reasons being that this area had a wide floodplain and the stream could move back and forth. And really the issue here was the invasive plants and the deer eating anything that wasn't invasive. So the decision was made to go ahead and tolerate the stream bank erosion in this area and instead plant about 2.5 acres of trees and seeding to try to do something about the invasives in this area. And so the large caliber trees, 1 inch diameter, were installed. And there was some thought put forth into invasives control. We don't want to put in a bunch of vegetation and then have the invasives take it over and kill it. So this photo here was taken 2 weeks ago of this area, and the trees have been planted for 3 years now. You can see that the stream is still eroding, but the 1 inch caliber trees that were installed are doing well. And you'll see some brown areas there in the grass. That's where invasives have been treated around the tree planted areas to keep them healthy. Given that a tree fall might rupture an existing sewer here, concurrence was made that something needed to be done here. The photo in the left-hand side, it's a little bit hard to see, but there's a manhole there wrapped by tree roots. We were very concerned that if the tree went down, and there was a good chance it would rip out the sewer, and we would have a pretty bad sewer overflow problem. but we didn't want to unnecessarily move the stream if we didn't have to. So you can see that red dot there is the exposed sewer in this plan view. The light blue line is where the pattern of the stream is, and we really didn't want to change it if we didn't have to. Now, we had done a lot of studies, including some erosion measurement, and we knew that the stream banks were moving about 0.1 foot to 0.2 foot a year, and the meanders was moving down valleys. So that helped us determine the minimal amount of minimal amount of sewer relocation to install to protect this area. So in this case, we didn't move the stream, we moved the utility. This is just a photo of that work after it was done, looking downstream. And so it's the sewer manhole has been removed, but that's where it was. And then put in this bend is some tow wood. You can see there along the water, and some encapsulated fill. So this was a good selling point with the citizens saying, you know, we have to address this exposed sewer. We're going to move the sewer, and we're going to put in some soft bank protection, but we're going to keep the stream in place otherwise and not impact it. So that's one of the 4 new manholes that was installed further back into the floodplain. So the last work area, tributary 2, which was 700 linear feet, that was the most involved. And the task force was educated about restoration priorities as seen in this slide. And they agreed that the priority 3 approach was best. But the next question was, what exactly would it look like? So this is kind of where we shined a little bit, in my opinion. We took the task force members on a tour of a bunch of local stream restoration sites of various sizes and types. And many of these were in Rockville or near Rockville, but some of them were outside and further in Montgomery County. And the upshot of that tour from the citizens was there were some things they liked, and there were some things they didn't like. And they really didn't like, where there was a bunch of heavy, large, imbricated rocks, rock walls, things that sort of looked like retaining walls. That was very negatively perceived. A little bit more on the priority 3. One of my jobs was to determine the minimal, the maximum length, or I should say the maximum width that needed to be impacted, and to not impact a foot more than was necessary to do the stream work in this area. So that it ended up being about 70 linear feet wide. And one of the goals was to bring the stream channel up about a foot and lower the adjacent banks about a foot. So about a 2-foot difference of raising the water table. So we had to get the new stream in, we had to get new benches in, we had to tie into the existing floodplain, and we had to have construction equipment access through these areas. So this graphic is fairly to scale, and you can see that those will still be some tree impact, in some cases significant, even with the smallest footprint I could design to. This is one of the positive aspects, though, of doing that work. As I mentioned, the water table was raised about 2 feet, and so you can't see it, but on the right side outside the photo was a small sort of isolated wetland that had like one little drainage swale getting to the creek. And once we did the priority 3 design, we raised the water table, and pretty much instantaneously we expanded that wetland area right up to the creek. So this was a picture from 2018. This is a picture from 2 weeks ago. That wetland area is there on the right side. You can see the cattails. So, this is an example where raising the water table really benefited water quality. Remember, I mentioned that the citizens didn't want to see a bunch of rock. Now we needed to put in rock to create what we call riffle grade controls. So those are the gray stone that you see there. And then the water was then sent around in meander curves, and that is the wood toe that you see there on the left, and I'll show you more about that. But this was the work done over the winter, and the water is being pumped around the stream. This is a photo of that area right after the stream water was let back in. And then this was a few months later after a small storm event. So we have a lot of seed that was used, and all of the banks had core mat to protect them, for the first year or so, to keep things from eroding if we had a larger storm event. We did have to take out trees to do this work, so we repurposed them into what we call tow wood, and that was again a good selling point for the citizens with sustainability of the project. And so the tow wood consisted of dropping in these large tree trunks in one layer on stone. Here is shown as imported gravel. We actually used all of the stream bed material we could until we ran out of it, and then we transferred over to using gravel. But we would put a layer of this larger material in, and then we would put another layer the opposite way, and we would drop a combination of smaller limbs and soil in between everything and lock it together. When we were done, we had something that looked like this. We had this two big layers of tree trunks basically, and those would be staying wet the entire time when the water is let back through. And then we put in a bunch of smaller material on top, and we gave that the inelegant name of trash wood. But that will be something that we can show in this next photo. So about 2 years later, in this particular location, the tow wood, those big tree trunks are underwater. You can't even see them. And then in this photo, you can see some of that trash wood, which is very good ecologically, good for habitat. We call it trash wood because we were worried it would, collect trash. But you can see that the seeding and planting on those benches is really taken shape here. As I mentioned, sustainability for the project was something that was important for all parties, not just the citizens, but the consultants, the city as well. So trees that weren't used for that wood tow I just showed you were ground up and used to protect access paths, or they were used with that RSC sand material to improve nutrient removal. Virtually every downed tree was repurposed on site. And as I mentioned, stream bed material was completely reused. So that was scooped up and put aside and then reinstalled for some of our practices. It's hard to tell at a certain point, what is stream bed material and what is dirt. And so we created a visual guide for the contractor and for the city inspector, saying, if you have a condition that looks like one of these upper photos, you have enough material to reuse it as what we call the stream bed material. And then in some of these lower photos, there's just too much dirt to use that, and that that had to be used for another purpose. All right, so I'm going to show you 3 10-second videos, all very short. These were taken last week, right after a small storm event. So these are after the site is about 3 years old. In this photo, water is going to go from right to left over a riffle grade control, and that's going to be moving pretty fast. And then it hits a cross vein, what we call an A vein, that actually has 2 drops. It's going to hit a pool with that tow wood, which is going to be on the left side, and then it's going to slow down. And you can see obviously that the plants are growing right up to the stream edge. In this next video, this is one of the longer riffle grade controls, and the slope on this riffle grade control is 2.5%, which doesn't sound like much, but in stream world, that's fairly steep. But the photo or the video will show you that water moving pretty quickly, and you can see the vegetation on both sides of the riffle grade control, including, if you look carefully, some wetland plants that we did not seed. They were all volunteer. And this is the last video. This section of that 700-foot restoration had some riffle grade controls that were not nearly as steep. They're much more gentle, and therefore the water moves more slowly. You'll see that wetland area that is on the right side. And if you notice that house, this work was done on the preserve, but it abutted the 3 neighborhoods at locations. And so, it is still definitely an urban project. All right, my last 2 slides. Thanks for bearing with me. The site is subject to 3 years of independent monitoring to satisfy Army Corps of Engineer and Maryland Department of the Environment permit requirements. And it's in its 2nd year of monitoring. The year 1 results are here, and it's shown that the project is stable and it's meeting its design intent. Okay, so these purpose of these presentations today is to talk about community engagement in the design process. And I think my situation was a little bit different from Aileen's. This is an excerpt from some recent communication I had with Jim Rajovsky. Jim is the past president of the Woodley Gardens Civic Association. That picture is one of Jim's 2 dogs from last week. And so I wanted to just read what he said, because I think it walks us through the citizen involvement for the project in its entirety. I approached the Citizens Task Force for planning the Upper Watts Branch Forest Preserve stream dead set against the project. I had occasion to visit other stream restoration projects in the city, and I came away with the impression that they were ugly, ruined the natural look of streams and surrounding forests, and were prone to failure. Over the many months that the stream restoration planning process continued, during which the task force regularly met, the consultants gathered extensive data on the Upper Watts stream, reported on it, and educated the task force members about the science and engineering behind stream restoration. Notably, the consultants conveyed that they appreciated the beauty of the forest and took to heart the desire of the local citizens to preserve as many mature trees as possible. Recommendations were readily accepted by all in the task force because of the group's trust in the consultant's judgment. And so that's sort of a snapshot of what ended up being about a 6 or 7 year process to get us to a successful project. And with that, I'll turn it back over to David.
Great. Thanks very much, Tim. 2 very different projects, but I think it just, helps hopefully to illustrate kind of the ways that this, community engagement process can look, depending on where you are and where you're working and the types of projects that you're working on. We do have a couple of minutes for Q&A, although as I've mentioned before, we are recording the session. So if you do have to hop off, feel free. You can always catch the Q&A later on the recording. We did have one question come in already, and the question, I'll put it to you, Tim, because I think it probably makes a lot of sense in sort of a task force type of setting. But the question was a professional moderator or outreach coordination firm used to help with the engagement on either of these projects? So Tim, maybe you can speak to that first, and Eileen, maybe you can do it, address it after Tim.
So we did not have a professional moderator. What we did was give the citizens that 50% leadership role and the ability basically to veto the steps if they weren't in agreement with it. So that was enough to not have to require an outside moderator. I don't think I mentioned that we had about 15 task force meetings about every 2 months over a 2-year period. So it was an extensive amount of meeting times, but after the first few meetings, which were sort of, airing some grievances about some of the city's work in the past, the task force really kind of came together quickly, and it was like we were all doing it, together. And so, the use of a moderator in our case wasn't necessary.
Yeah, and I can add on to that too. We also didn't hire a specific firm. However, Nature Sacred, who we partnered with, their model is community designed green spaces. And a lot of their model is focused on the community engagement aspect. So they were the ones who led a lot of those conversations, since that's their focus as an organization.
Thanks. And I had a question. Eileen, you focused on, or you talked about sort of the phase of engagement that continues actually after the project, or at least the initial phase of the project is completed. So maybe for you, I was wondering, you mentioned that you worked with, Cheryl's team to kind of get some feedback on the ground. I was curious if you considered holding any sort of post phase 2 or phase 1 kind of stakeholder or community meetings again to sort of solicit broader feedback, or if you felt comfortable sort of working with that smaller group and sort of those on the ground, experts, I guess, in terms of the community in that process.
Yeah, that's a good point, David. We actually haven't thought of that. So now I'm thinking that's a good idea, and maybe we should consider it. But so far, we have relied on Cheryl to be kind of the spokesperson of what's happening on the ground and communicating that up to us.
Okay, great. Yeah. And I was wondering, Tim, I guess sort of a similar question, if, the city or your project team had, done any sort of additional outreach or follow-up. Obviously, you mentioned the quotes from the community, association president, but to sort of solicit feedback on sort of impressions kind of after the fact that might help inform future projects down the line.
The consultant team did not do that directly, but I have to give credit to the city. They've kept the ear of the citizens. As I said, this was a park before we got started, so there's a lot of folks that regularly, walk it, including Jim and others. And so, there's pretty much an open communication chain now between, the citizens and the city. So as concerns come up, if there's trees that are coming down, et cetera, that's communicated. And then from the consultants end, I quite frankly am interested in the monitoring report, to see that things that we installed are stable. But we have done a few, interesting, outreach type things. We created a video of how this project came to be and posted that for the city. So we didn't have a line item in our contract to do, post project community, opinion gathering, but it wouldn't cost that much to do it with the web tools we have available today. It is, something that we may want to have our clients consider.
The last question that I had for you guys, unless we have any others come in from our audience, and actually before I do that, let me just say I did put the link to our evaluation survey in the chat box. So before folks head out today, if you could open that up and take a second, it should take less than 2 or 3 minutes to fill out for us. So I appreciate that. But yeah, so my last question is, it's sort of interesting to see in some ways 2 different models for how the community engagement process happened. And I, correct me if you would characterize it differently, but I think in the case of the Mount Olivet project, it was really about sort of finding a local community champion in a lot of ways, who can sort of help create that connection to the local community members and talk about how folks are using that space and using the land and help bring people together. I think, in the case of the Upper Watts Branch project, that task force model seemed to work really well, where it was a really formalized, group of folks where they were kind of, giving people a real vote in the decision-making process in a very documented, kind of table sort of way. I was wondering if maybe each of you could sort of speak to, making the choices about what those engagement models might look like and what might make sense or might work for a different type of project. You know, how, if you're going into something and you're trying to figure out how to get started or how to kind of, you know, find your way into a community for these early outreach efforts, you know, what are some considerations that people might want to think about in those kind of early stages?
Aileen, you want to take a crack at that first?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm seeing one of the differences too in how those models came about is what type of projects versus ours was on private land and Tim, yours was through local government, municipality. So I think with the first step is looking at what type of project is, who uses the land and who owns the land. And for us, since it was private, we found that the people who maintain it are the ones who know the best of kind of how to use it, which is how we came to our model versus I think if you're looking at public land, you have a larger variety of users and people who manage it.
David, I've been doing this for a while, and when I first started these types of projects, it was sort of the norm that as the engineer, you would get a plan to like the 60% stage, and you would then present it to the citizens like a library, and you know, we would put up pictures and explain, you know, the positive elements ecologically for what we were doing, and then give people a chance to comment. And folks would come in and do that. Sometimes it was something very specific, like I want this tree saved on this corner of my backyard, and so that was still sort of we're giving you information about what we're doing, being the consultants and the client. And so with my project, we had to play some catch up, but it was really more collaborative. And so, I would think a model, moving forward now is, having that community engagement much earlier, definitely at the concept level. And so if, as engineering firm, you want to have a fairly good idea of how a project is going to move forward, what type of engineering practice, et cetera. So there's a bit of unknown if you have a process where the public can come in and sort of run the railroad, but increasingly, especially in urban conditions, you have to have the buy-in of a lot of additional stakeholders. So do you take the time and the money at the front end to get their input, or do you deal potentially with the fallout at the back end if you don't? And so I would vote for the former end. Aileen's project is definitely a good model of that.
All right, well, we have just 5 more minutes here, and we did have one more question come in, so I would like to try to address it. I don't think that this is necessarily the case with either of your projects here that we're talking about today, but perhaps maybe something that you have experienced in the past, and it's a bit of a spitballing exercise. But the question was, if you have a project, how do you increase community involvement when maybe the local municipality is not as interested, either, I assume here, in the actual engagement, the community engagement component of the project, and maybe there isn't an obvious local partner that is sort of forthcoming. Sort of what are some of the options for folks that are really kind of at the stage where they're trying to drum up interest in partners and trying to get that engagement without the easier tie-ins that might come with, the local government resources or something like that?
I'll go first. It's a little sticky if, as an engineering firm, you have a client and they have a very, concrete idea of where they want to move forward. And if they don't want a lot of community engagement or any, they have that ability to sort of say, this is what we want. We think it's for the greater good. I think our role as consultants then would be to maybe present some of these charrette type things like this presentation, to say that the input is important, and we could potentially head off some problems if you do some engagement. And internet tools these days with surveys you know, SurveyMonkey and others, you know, are so quick and easy that that might be something that I would tell a client or potential client that, you know, why don't you go ahead and engage in these very low cost, you know, feeling tools to see what people think. It doesn't really hurt you. You're not obligated to do anything, you know, or, you know, with those recommendations, but at least you're aware of them.
Yeah, to build on that, since we aren't doing projects directly with municipalities, it's a little different. So this is more speaking to that finding the connection. But what we usually do when we're trying to find a site or connect with the community to find that person to help is work with a lot of the smaller local nonprofits who do a lot more work on the ground and probably have more of a connection of finding those people who will then help support us moving the project forward.
Well, great. Well, I can't thank you both enough for both your presentations today, as well as your great work on these projects. We're really excited to share, you know, this really good work with our network members, and I hope that there are some good lessons that folks can take away from these two projects and help with them with their work in the future. I just, before we go, last thing I wanted to mention is that we do have a few more webcasts coming up over the next couple of weeks. Starting next Wednesday at noon, we have a great presentation from a couple of researchers from Philadelphia, actually, on incorporating equity into green infrastructure planning. They've done some really nice work with some decision framework types of tools that folks can use to think about their project planning in a more kind of comprehensive and holistic way to address, you know, a number of benefits while also keeping equity sort of at the forefront of that work. On the 15th and the 22nd, we have sort of two paired webcasts that actually will probably pair pretty nicely with the presentations that you saw today as well. Really focused on growing your watershed stewardship programs. So again, we have a couple of BUBBAs projects that are going to be featured here on the education and outreach side of things, really working with local community stewards to sort of empower those local communities and those local stewards to help advance watershed messaging and watershed education, as well as some new tools that are coming out through the Chesapeake Bay program to help local governments with identifying potential targets for behavior change campaigns and appropriate audiences to sort of help make that outreach and communications efforts, maybe for your MS4 permit requirements, a little bit more painless. So hopefully you can join us for those. I will say the webcast on the 22nd is not up yet for registration. I hopefully will have that posted shortly, but the 8th and the 15th are available to register. So please head on over. I hope you check those out and come back and join us. Apologies for folks who are having difficulty with the registration pages. I promise all of your registrations are going through and they will continue to go through. And I'll be sure to send emails keeping you all up to date to let you know the details when you are joining us. So thank you again to Tim and Eileen. Really appreciate having you both today. Thank you all for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.